Morning in the suburbs of Columbus was wrapped in a thin layer of fog, the chill seeping through every gap in a coat. Linda Rowe, 46 years old, pedaled her old bicycle along the familiar road to the Fresh Mart supermarket. The seat was faded, one pedal a little loose, but to her, those were just small details not worth worrying about. For more than 10 years, through rain, snow, or fever, Linda had never missed a day of work. She arrived early, not because anyone asked her to, but because it was a habit that had become part of who she was doing things right before anyone else even realized they needed doing. Her breath came in pale clouds before her, hands gripping the handlebars tightly to keep balance on the damp road. Passing the bakery, the smell of fresh bread briefly pulled her mind back to the simple breakfasts of her childhood. The security guard at the back door raised a hand in greeting, and Linda returned the familiar smile before parking her bike in its usual spot against the brick wall. She pinned on her scratched name tag neatly, took a deep breath, and stepped into her shift. In the cramped break room under flickering yellow light, Linda opened her lunchbox. White rice, a boiled egg, some pickled vegetables, nothing much, yet still enough to share when she saw Tyler, the new hire in his early 20s, sitting quietly against the shelving with nothing to eat. She didn't ask questions, simply placed half her rice and the egg into his hands. "Thanks," Tyler murmured, eyes down. Linda only smiled, continuing her meal as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. The shift began with cleaning the aisles, and Linda knelt to scrub the floor in aisle 5. The water in the bucket had turned dark, her hands moving slowly and steadily. A pair of work boots brushed past, nearly stepping on her hand, but the owner didn't bother to stop or apologize. Linda glanced up briefly, then lowered her head and kept working. From the other side of the shelf, a man in a plain polo shirt stood still, pushing an empty cart. The name tag on his chest read Ethan Cole, trainee technician, but his eyes didn't carry the uncertainty of a newcomer. His gaze was observant, deliberate, as if every move she made held meaning. When Ethan struggled with the price gun, Linda gently took it, adjusted the grip, and explained how to avoid jamming the labels. "This thing jams a lot. Hold it like this and it'll work better." Ethan nodded with a slight smile. "Thanks. I'm Ethan." "Linda, if you need anything, just ask." From then on, they worked side by side. She organized the shelves quickly and neatly. He tried to keep up, occasionally dropping a few packs of tissues, only to have her quietly stoop to pick them up. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 10 years. Never missed a day." Linda answered simply, her smile soft but her eyes steady. "Through rain, snow, or sickness, I still come in. The job isn't perfect, but being on time and doing your part, that matters." Ethan could only nod. Meanwhile, at the far-off checkout counters, store manager Sharon Blake stood with a clipboard in her arms, her eyes scrutinizing. When Linda finished arranging the canned soup display, their eyes met for a few seconds. Linda gave a small nod, but Sharon turned away without responding. The next morning, Linda hurried in through the back door, her coat still holding the morning chill. Her bike chain had slipped on the way, making her 3 minutes late. Sharon was already waiting by the time clock, arms folded. "Late," she said, cutting Linda off before she could explain. "I've logged it into the system. 15 minutes pay docked." Linda was startled. "But I haven't even clocked in on the floor yet." "Doesn't matter. If you want to contest it, go through HR." Sharon walked away, leaving Linda standing still, checklist in hand. Just a few steps away, Ethan quietly watched. He saw her shoulders dip slightly, then straighten again as if nothing had happened. He said nothing, but in his eyes, a decision was already taking shape. The murmur of customers and the rattle of shopping cart wheels on the tile blended with the steady beeps of barcode scanners, forming the familiar soundtrack of a Fresh Mart morning. Linda bent over to stack boxes onto the household goods shelves, her movement steady, never rushed, but with no wasted motion. She had done this task thousands of times, to the point where every position and every label existed in her memory, like a perfectly arranged grid. At the far end of the aisle, Ethan pretended to check inventory, but his eyes stayed on her. He no longer took public notes, the small notebook now tucked in his pocket. But every detail was stored in his mind, the precision with which she straightened a misplaced product, the quiet look she gave when she saw a young employee laughing while neglecting their work. In the hallway leading to the stockroom, Linda came across Kyle leaning against a shelf, one hand holding his phone, an earbud hanging loosely from one ear. "Kyle, the paper towels aren't stocked yet," she said gently. He just muttered a, "Yeah," without looking up, his fingers still swiping across the screen, feet unmoving. Linda let out a quiet breath and kept pushing the heavy stock cart forward. From around the corner, Ethan had seen it all. Minutes later, Sharon appeared, her high heels clicking quickly on the tile. She looked at Kyle and gave him a smile Linda had rarely seen directed at anyone. "Good job, you're looking energetic today," Sharon said cheerfully. Kyle answered with a lazy thumbs up. Just a few steps away, Linda was struggling with a storeroom door whose hinge was jammed. No one came to help. Back in the break room, Linda opened the computer to check her timesheet for the week. Her brow furrowed when she saw that Tuesday and Wednesday were both marked late start with 15 minutes pay docked, even though she clearly remembered clocking in before her shift. Her hand hovered over the print button, but in the end she canceled, closed the screen, and silently packed up. She didn't know that from the hallway, Ethan had seen the entire thing, his expression tightening slightly. That afternoon, an elderly customer came to the counter with a bag of cat food. "I lost my receipt somewhere," she said, her voice trembling. Linda gave a reassuring smile. "That's all right, let me print another for you." She typed a few keys, and the printer hummed out a fresh receipt. "Thank you. My eyesight's been getting worse lately," the customer said, relief on her face. But before she could leave, Sharon walked over, arms crossed. "Linda, policy doesn't allow reprints without a manager's code. You know that." Linda lowered her head. There's no just. Breaking policy is breaking policy." The customer bowed her head and stepped back. Linda replied softly, "Yes, I understand." Sharon turned away, leaving the air heavy. Ethan, standing in the snack aisle, tightened his grip on the shopping cart handle. In the cold storage room, while Linda was stacking crates of produce, Ethan leaned in and asked quietly, "Is it always like this here?" Linda paused, giving a tired smile. "Almost always." He nodded, saying nothing more, but the silence between them felt heavier. The next day, when Linda brought Sharon a proposal to reduce packaging waste and cut down on spoiled stock, she received only a short response. "We already have a system for that," followed by the paper being pushed back toward her. Not a single glance. Linda folded the paper, tucked it into her pocket, and walked away. Ethan, passing by, noticed her hand clenched tight even though her face stayed calm. Near the end of her shift, a call came in from the service desk, a customer complaint about being left unattended in the pet aisle. Without checking, Sharon said, "Linda, you were on that shift." "But I was in the dry goods section." "The schedule says your name, that's enough." A red mark appeared on Sharon's tablet screen. Verbal warning, 30 minutes pay docked. Linda stood still, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she didn't argue. This time, Ethan, who was nearby, didn't just remember, he pulled out his notebook and wrote it down, word for word. Late that night, Linda stood alone by the stockroom exit, one hand resting against the wall as she quietly wiped at the corner of her eye. Laughter and conversation echoed from inside, but none of it reached her. Her worn-down shoes still stood firm beneath her. From a distance, Ethan stopped, not calling her name, simply watching. He understood then that strength isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's the ability to keep walking forward even when no one sees you fall. The next morning, the air in the stockroom felt heavy. Ethan walked in through the back entrance, holding a box of laundry detergent as if he had just pulled it from the shelf, but in reality, he was checking the tiny camera discreetly clipped to the back of his collar. The small green light blinked softly, confirming everything was ready. On the phone in his shirt pocket, a live feed displayed the perfect angle to capture every interaction between staff and management. From this moment on, nothing would go unnoticed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the sales floor like any other employee. In the break room, Sharon stood before a group of employees, holding a clipboard of numbers. Linda's department is behind schedule again this week. Customers have complained. There's still unsorted stock. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. A few heads turned toward Linda's usual seat, but it was empty. She was busy in the stockroom. Sharon went on. I know you all like Linda, but kindness doesn't get the shelves stocked. Maybe it's time to rethink her schedule. A few faint laughs broke the air. Sitting at the end of the table, Ethan kept his eyes fixed on Sharon, the camera recording every word. During lunch break, Ethan pushed his cart past the loading dock. 2 employees stood there smoking, coffee cups in hand. Heard Sharon's doing a staff purge next month. Who's on the list? Not sure, but Linda's name came up. Been here too long, salary's high, easy cut. Both laughed out loud. Ethan slowed his pace, listening to every word, but didn't speak. His hand gripped the cart handle until his knuckles whitened. That afternoon, Linda stood outside the manager's office, holding a neatly typed page, a few proposals to cut costs and reduce product waste. She waited for Sharon to hang up the phone before stepping inside. I think we could. Leave it on the desk, Sharon interrupted without looking up. She glanced only at the title, then pushed the paper back toward Linda. We're fine. Don't need it. Linda gave a slight nod, slipped the paper into her pocket, and walked out without a word. Nearby, Ethan caught her eyes. In that moment, he saw the deep fatigue etched there, but also the patience still intact. At the checkout counter, a young mother struggled with a crying child and a cart full of groceries. Linda stepped forward. Let me help you bag these. The woman looked up, relief washing over her face. Thank you so much. Linda worked quickly and neatly, placing each item so nothing fragile was crushed. From a distance, Sharon stood with her arms crossed, watching but not approaching. Linda kept smiling, speaking softly to the customer as if that watchful gaze didn't exist. Ethan, pretending to check the fruit display nearby, took in the whole scene. He knew that here, there were those who followed rules, and those who followed what was right. Linda was in the second group. By day's end, the familiar injustice returned. Sharon received a customer complaint over the phone. Without asking questions, she immediately wrote Linda's name under violations and docked her pay. Linda began to explain, but Sharon cut her off. It's done. We need accountability, not excuses. The sharp confirmation beep sounded on the screen. Linda stood still, eyes unblinking. Nearby, in the tools aisle, Ethan didn't just watch silently. This time he recorded every detail, every gesture, every heavy pause. Near closing time, Linda found a quiet spot by the loading area. She leaned against the cold wall, one hand covering her eyes. Just a few seconds. Then she straightened, adjusted her apron. Her worn shoes held firm against the floor. At the far end of the hallway, Ethan stopped. He didn't speak, only watched. And in his gaze there was certainty this was no longer just an observation. It was time to act. The next morning, the sky was a solid shade of gray, light rain falling over the Fresh Mart parking lot. Linda had just parked her bike under the awning when Sharon appeared, standing stiffly beside the time clock. Tomorrow morning at 8, you'll meet the regional director upstairs, Sharon said coldly. Linda hesitated. Is something wrong? Sharon gave a thin smile without meeting her eyes. Just be there. They'll explain. And don't be late. Then she turned and walked away. Linda stood still by the shelves, one hand resting on the edge of a cart, the chill from her palm slowly creeping up her shoulder. Before she could settle the questions in her mind, the overhead speakers crackled and a voice came through. All staff to the main meeting room in 5 minutes. Mandatory. Carts stopped, customers looked around curiously. Employees abandoned their tasks and began making their way to the back. Sharon moved quickly through the aisles, this time without her clipboard, her face slightly tense. Linda caught a glimpse of Ethan. He only shrugged, but his eyes told her she should follow. The meeting room had been rearranged into a circle of chairs. There was no coffee, no weekly schedule board. The air was still, as if something was about to break. Whispers floated around. Is someone getting fired? More cuts? Is this about Linda? Linda sat in the back row, her hands folded on her lap. Ethan sat directly across from her, his gaze never leaving her. The door opened, and slow, deliberate footsteps echoed on the tile. The man who entered was no longer wearing a polo shirt or tool belt. A dark blazer, crisp white shirt, polished shoes. The name tag was gone, but no one needed it to know this was not a trainee technician. Ethan Langford stepped forward, standing beside Sharon, her face paled slightly, her eyes avoiding his. "Good morning, everyone," his voice was deep and clear. "I'm Ethan Langford, CEO of Freshmart." A few sharp intakes of breath, someone muttered, "The boss." He paused for a few seconds, scanning the circle. "For the past 5 days, I've worked alongside you, not as a leader, but as a new hire. I wanted to see the truth of this place." Linda sat still, eyes wide, recalling every moment they'd stood together by the shelves, in the cold storage, at the price gun station. Ethan pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. "I've seen enough, not just individual mistakes, but repeated patterns." He glanced at Sharon, then opened the paper. "I've recorded names, incidents, and how they were handled when it was believed no one was watching." The room was silent except for the slow whir of the ceiling fan. "In 5 days, I've seen people praised for doing nothing, and others punished for doing what's right. I've seen an employee ignored, dismissed, yet still patient, still helping customers and colleagues without asking for anything." His eyes went directly to Linda. She didn't blink or speak, but her breathing slowed. Ethan took out a small remote and pressed a button. The screen behind him lit up. Videos began to play, Linda printing a receipt for an elderly customer, Sharon's sharp voice. "This isn't charity." Linda holding a timesheet, Sharon cutting in. "I don't have time for complaints." Sharon entering a warning and docking pay before Linda could explain. In none of the clips did Linda argue back, only stood in silence, enduring. When the screen went dark, the room stayed in that thick, heavy silence. Ethan said, "No one deserves to be treated like this, especially not in my company." Sharon lowered her head, arms hanging at her sides, offering no defense. Every eye in the room turned to her, the one who had held absolute power in this branch, now at the center of judgment. Ethan looked around the room. "This branch will close immediately, not as punishment, but because the culture here is broken at its foundation. I won't rebuild on a rotten base. I'll start fresh, with people who understand what this needs to be." Murmurs rose, some in shock, others in relief. Linda remained still, but for the first time in years, she felt the weight on her shoulders lift. Ethan turned to her. "If you agree, you'll be the first person I keep." Linda's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He smiled faintly. "You've shown more leadership, dedication, and integrity than I've seen in anyone here. I don't want to lose that." She looked around. The faces that had once been indifferent now waited for her answer. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Then just say yes." Linda lowered her eyes to her hands, then looked up. In her gaze, she was no longer the woman who silently endured. She was part of the change that had just begun. The sound of applause began slowly from one corner of the room. At first, just a single pair of hands, then two, then the entire room joined in. It wasn't the loud, raucous applause of excitement, but a steady, measured rhythm, like an acknowledgement of something that should have been seen long ago. Linda hesitated slightly, her eyes blinking rapidly, one hand unconsciously brushing the corner of her eye before lowering it, as if afraid someone might notice the emotion rising within her. Ethan didn't smile. He simply nodded, letting the moment belong to her. Linda rose slowly, her posture neither raised like a victor nor lowered like someone receiving charity. It was simple yet steady, and it stretched the quiet in the room for a few more beats. When the applause faded, Ethan opened his briefcase, pulled out a white envelope sealed with a silver emblem, stepped forward and placed it in Linda's hand. She looked down at it, then up again, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "It's not just about keeping you," he said deliberately. "It's about trusting you to lead." Linda opened the envelope. Inside was a new contract, the title, Store Manager, Central Region Pilot Branch Project. Her name was printed clearly, along with terms outlining the creation of a new operating model. I want the next branch to reflect what this one could not become, Ethan continued, and I want you to be the one to build it. Linda's throat tightened. She gave a small nod, her hand lightly gripping the edge of the contract as if holding on to something fragile yet priceless. Images of years spent kneeling to scrub floors, straightening crooked labels, quietly packing customers' bags, all of it now seemed to align into a path leading to this moment. A few weeks later, morning light streamed through the large front windows of the new Fresh Mart, stretching across the wide, spotless aisles. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the air, blending with the fragrance of produce from the fresh goods section. Linda walked past the registers where a young cashier looked up and smiled. "Good morning, manager." In the produce section, another employee waved. "Do you need help setting up the break room?" Linda nodded slightly, still not used to people coming to her offering support. At the service counter, a handwritten sign was neatly taped up. "Kindness is not policy, it is culture." Linda read it, smiling softly. It was her own words, now turned into the store's guiding principle. In her small office with a simple nameplate on the door, Linda set down her bag and took a deep breath. There were no heavy sighs before starting the day anymore, no sense of walking into a place just to endure. Now, she walked in to build. At Register 3, a new employee stood fumbling with the touchscreen, his hand uncertain over the functions. He was young, with bright eyes, and a small hearing aid tucked behind his left ear. Linda approached with a smile, gently touched his hand to get his attention, then wrote a few words on a small piece of paper. "Let's do it together." He nodded, eyes full of gratitude. Linda patiently demonstrated each step, letting him repeat them. When he made a mistake, she only shook her head lightly, smiled encouragingly, and wrote again. "Try again." Customers nearby waited quietly, no one showing impatience. When the transaction finally went through, Linda gave him a thumbs up, and his face lit up. Without a single spoken word, confidence had been planted. Outside in the parking lot, Ethan stood with his arms crossed, not wearing a suit, just a simple shirt. Through the glass, he could see Linda smiling beside the new employee, stepping back to let him complete the transaction on his own. A small cheer followed, then a celebratory high five. Ethan smiled not for anyone to see, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew what he had hoped for was taking shape. He didn't walk in. He turned away, leaving the right person to continue leading. During the lunch break, Fresh Mart's new break room was bright and tidy, with sunlight pouring through the large glass windows. Linda sat at a table near the corner, pouring hot tea from her familiar thermos. Beside her, the new employee still looked a little unsure, his lunchbox unopened, his fingers tapping lightly on the tabletop as if he wanted to say something but was hesitant. After a moment, he looked up and asked quietly, How do you know if you're doing the right thing?" Linda smiled, set her cup down, thought for a moment, then replied slowly, "You don't always know for sure. There will be days when people don't notice you, don't thank you. Sometimes they might overlook you or judge you." He stayed silent, his eyes dropping slightly. Linda continued, her voice warm but steady. "But if you lead with kindness, you won't lose your way even when no one is paying attention." It didn't sound like a lecture, but more like a piece of truth distilled from years of patience and persistence. The young employee nodded, a small nod that carried a hint of relief, as if he had found something to hold on to in the midst of his early, uncertain days. That afternoon, the checkout area moved with a smooth rhythm. The sound of scanners, the rustle of paper bags, and the greetings to customers blended into an easy flow. Linda stood at Register 5, scanning items with practiced ease, neatly arranging each one into the bags. An elderly man approached, buying only a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. When Linda handed him the bag, he paused, looked directly at her, and spoke in a low voice. "Thank you, not just for today, but for the way you treat people." Linda was slightly taken aback, her eyes meeting the unhurried sincerity in his gaze. "Have a good day, sir," she replied. But as he walked away slowly, the words lingered in her mind, making her hands pause for just a brief moment. From across the floor, the scene seemed to stretch, as if time slowed down to acknowledge a moment that appeared small, yet held the meaning of years of dedication. Not because of any grand gesture, but because of something harder to see, the way one person could change the atmosphere around them simply through steadfastness and heart. When the clock struck closing time, the store lights softened and the sound of footsteps thinned out. Linda stood by the door, waving and smiling at the last customer. There were no fireworks, no loud embraces, just the quiet after a long day and a deep sense of completeness resting inside her. On the screen, as it faded to black, white text appeared. Have you ever met someone like her? If you have, leave a comment saying, "Me too." A brief pause, then the next line, because kindness is not rare, it's just often overlooked. The gentle background music swelled, not rushing but quietly guiding the audience out of the story, leaving behind an aftertaste deeper than any final words. The last image wasn't Ethan's face or Linda's new nameplate, but an open space for the viewers to fill with their own memories of the quiet people they had once met or perhaps once missed. Morning at the new Fresh Mart began with warm sunlight streaming through the large glass panels. Linda arrived earlier than her shift, as had long been her habit. She walked the aisles, straightening a few items that were out of place, checking price tags, and making sure everything was ready before the first customer stepped through the door. In the produce section, a group of young employees were arranging fruit, working and laughing, not the lazy chatter of the old branch, but laughter mixed with questions, requests for help, and nods of acknowledgement toward one another. From the checkout area, the new employee, the young man with the hearing aid whom Linda had helped the day before, waved to her. "Linda, I remember all the steps now," he said, his voice excited. Linda walked over, watching as he carried out each action, pressing every button correctly, each movement smooth. When the customer took their bag and smiled in thanks, he looked up at her. "I did it." Linda gave a small nod, offering no loud praise, just a light hand on his shoulder and a smile. At midday, Ethan stopped by unannounced. He wasn't in a suit, just a rolled-sleeve shirt and khaki pants, a coffee cup in his hand. He stood quietly at the end of an aisle, observing without intervening, without signaling for anyone to notice him. When Linda passed, he simply nodded. "Looks good," she answered with a calm smile. "Thank you. But this is the whole team's work." Ethan glanced around, seeing how everyone naturally supported one another, noticing the board in the break room with small handwritten notes. Remember to help customers find items if they seem lost. Place heavy items at the bottom of the bag. He knew then that he had left the right person in charge. Late in the afternoon, an elderly customer became lost in the store. Linda didn't just point her in the right direction, she walked her to the aisle, took the product from the shelf, placed it in her basket, and asked if she needed anything else. The customer shook her head but held Linda's hand briefly. "Not many people still take the time like you do." And Linda smiled, not taking it as flattery, but as a reminder that what she was doing was still the right thing. At the end of the day, when the store had gone quiet, Linda sat alone in her office. On the desk lay the signed manager's contract, but she didn't look at it. Her gaze was fixed out the window toward the empty customer benches resting under the glow of the streetlights. She thought about the years that had passed, the unacknowledged hours, the unwarranted reprimands, the days she had to keep herself standing. All of it now felt like the foundation for building something better, not just for herself, but for everyone who walked in here each day. Outside the door, Ethan leaned against the wall, not calling out, simply watching as the light in her office slowly went out. He knew he didn't need to stay to oversee anything. The right person was already in the right place. A week later, the afternoon at the new Fresh Mart moved in a steady rhythm. Soft golden light spilled over each aisle, customers coming and going without rush. Linda was reviewing the delivery report when a voice called from the registers. "Linda, there's a small issue at Register 2. She walked out to find an elderly man fumbling for his wallet, with only a loaf of bread and a carton of milk on the belt. I think I left my wallet at home," he said quietly. Linda glanced at his thin, worn hands, then turned to the cashier. "Just charge it to the store account. I'll take care of it later." The cashier nodded and completed the transaction. Linda placed the bag in his hands and smiled. "Have a good day. Next time, just bring your smile." The old man chuckled softly and walked away at an unhurried pace. A few customers nearby had seen the entire exchange. No one said a word, but the way they looked at Linda carried something different, not curiosity, but quiet respect. At the end of her shift, Linda made one last walk through the store. Everything was in order, price tags aligned, aisles clear. In the produce section, the new employee was carefully wiping up a patch of water on the floor, even though no one had asked. When he saw Linda, he said, "I remember you told me, customer safety is our responsibility too." Linda nodded, a faint smile crossing her face, and kept moving. Outside, the sky had deepened. The store lights cast a warm glow across the empty parking lot. Linda paused at the door to wave to the last customer leaving. The moment was so still she could hear the faint rustle of wind through the trees along the road. No background music, no applause, just a quiet peace she had once thought she'd never find in this job. As the sliding doors closed, a gentle breeze from the air conditioning passed by, carrying the clean scent of a place carefully tended to. Linda stood for a few seconds, as if to imprint the scene in her memory, not for its beauty, but for its meaning. This was the result of persistence, of refusing to give up even when no one was watching. In the distance, under the glow of a street lamp, Ethan leaned against a post, looking through the glass. He didn't call her name, didn't step inside. He only smiled softly, a silent acknowledgement that what he had hoped for had become real, and more importantly, that it would continue to exist even when he was no longer there. On Saturday morning, the store opened earlier than usual. Linda had been there since the sun had only just begun to rise, the sky still brushed with a pale pink hue. She and a few employees arranged the display area for the weekend rush when customers were usually at their busiest. Shelves were pushed into straight lines, promotional signs were placed neatly, and every small detail was given attention. Around 9 o'clock, a group of young customers came in, shopping and chatting cheerfully. At Register 3, the new employee, the young man with the hearing aid, was serving a family. His hands moved quickly and precisely, his expression focused but not tense. When he handed the bag to the customer, he bowed his head in thanks and received a satisfied smile in return. Linda, standing at the next register, watched without stepping in, only giving a quiet nod when his eyes met hers. At midday, in the break room, Linda placed a large pot of tea on the table and poured a cup for each person. "Today will be busier than usual, so remember to help each other out," she said, her voice calm but certain. No one seemed reluctant, in fact. Someone even volunteered to switch shifts to help a colleague with an urgent matter. In the late afternoon, a middle-aged man came to the service counter carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "These are for the store," he said, "for helping my mother last week. She told me about it and insisted I come thank you." Linda was slightly surprised, accepted the flowers, and asked him to pass along her regards to his mother. She placed the bouquet at the front desk where everyone could see it as a reminder that even the smallest gestures leave a lasting mark. When the last customer left, Linda gathered the day's records and checked the schedule for tomorrow. The outside lights had softened, and reflected in the office window was her own image, not the overlooked employee hidden in a corner, but someone who led, kept the rhythm, and carried the spirit of an entire team. Leaving her office, she walked slowly through each aisle, her hand lightly gliding over the smooth wooden shelves. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly on the tile floor, blending with the hum of the air conditioning and the scent of fresh fruit. Together they formed a simple, precious kind of peace, one Linda had taken years to finally reach. Outside, the parking lot was quiet, lit only by a few warm yellow lamps casting their glow across the pavement. Linda locked the door, glanced back one last time, and realized she no longer felt as though she was closing up to brace for survival as before. Now, each day's closing was simply the opening to a new one, with good things preserved and carried forward. That Sunday, the store was busy from the morning. The sound of scanners, the rustle of paper bags, and the exchange of greetings blended into a lively rhythm. Linda moved through every section, sometimes helping the cashier process returned items, sometimes assisting the stock team with restocking fresh goods. Each time she passed a counter, she would quickly ask, "All good?" And she always received a firm nod in return. Around midday, an elderly customer approached the checkout. On the belt was only a bag of fruit and a jar of honey. He paid, took the bag from the cashier, then suddenly turned to Linda, who was standing nearby. "Thank you," he said, "not just for today, but for the way you and your team treat people. This place, it feels different." Then he walked away slowly, leaving Linda still for a moment, her heart warmed by the quiet, genuine recognition. In the afternoon, as the customer flow eased, Linda took a moment to step into the break room. On the table was a small card, the handwriting careful and neat. "Thank you for believing in me." There was no signature, but Linda knew instantly it was from the new employee. She held the card for a moment, then placed it in the drawer where she kept the things she wanted to hold on to. Near closing time, Linda walked the aisles with her team, checking and chatting lightly as they went. No one rushed to leave, and no one worked half-heartedly. They all wanted to be sure the store would be perfectly ready for the next day. As the main lights dimmed, leaving only the warm glow at the front desk, Linda stood at the door to say goodbye to each person as they left. "Good night. See you tomorrow," floated naturally, no longer the hollow pleasantries she used to hear in the old place. The sliding doors closed, the hum of the air conditioning faded, leaving a gentle silence. Linda looked through the glass out at the empty parking lot, then gave a small nod to herself. She knew she hadn't just changed a workplace, she had created a space where people felt they belonged. From the perspective of someone who has observed and studied workplace culture, I believe the true strength of an organization does not come from slogans on the wall or flashy marketing campaigns, but from the quiet moments that shape how people treat one another every single day. Linda did not just change a store, she proved that when kindness is given power, it spreads and becomes the standard, not the exception. A business may survive through strategy, but it can only be sustainable through culture. And that culture is built by those who choose to hold themselves to their values even when no one is watching, and who stand for what is right even when it means enduring in silence. If this story reminds you of someone, a coworker, a friend, or even yourself, leave a comment with just 3 words: always kind. It will be a reminder not to overlook the simplest yet most enduring values. And if you want to keep hearing true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the change that transforms an entire environment begins with a person we once simply passed by.